Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and we have in studio with us today Dr. Muriel Matthews as well as Kelly Shackelford. Dr. Matthews is, of course, the resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation. Kelly Shackelford, the president, CEO of First Liberty Institute. We're going to be talking about a number of things. First of all, of course, this whole issue of religious liberty, an announcement coming from the governor of Illinois that they're going to ease all the restrictions on in-person worship services because, after all, there was an appeal to the Supreme Court. Wasn't sure he was going to win that particular one. We, of course, have the actions by the president and the big tech companies having to do with this executive order on social media, so we'll talk about that. Oh, by the way, there are riots going on almost every single day since, of course, this tragic death that took place up in Minnesota. So we have a lot to cover, but let's, if we can, real quickly. First of all, Dr. Merrill Matthews, thank you for being with us today.
Another slow week.
Oh, my goodness. How are we going to get this in all these hours? But one of the people we were going to have on the program with us on Wednesday couldn't join us, so he joins us now. That's Pastor Brian Gibson. We have information about him on the website, so you can find out about his Peaceably Gather website. He's a graduate of Oral Roberts University. His churches are located in a number of places, both in Kentucky and Texas, and is an individual that has really taken kind of a really significant involvement in this idea of opening up the churches around the country. So, Brian Gibson, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Well, hey, it's an honor to be with you on Point of View, and I'm excited about it. So thank you for having me.
Talk about a little bit about how this got started, because first of all, as Kelly Shackelford pointed out to us back when we were kind of in the Eastern weekend, we were dealing with churches in Mississippi, we were dealing with churches in Kentucky and other places that were being told that they simply could not hold any kind of service, whether it was an in-person service or even a drive-in service. And that, if I understand, Brian, is one of the things that got you involved in not only saying, wait a minute, we need to stand up for our church, but we need to encourage other pastors around the country to be involved as well.
Absolutely. Kelly's been instrumental in helping the church around America figure out where its rights are and how to stand up. And just, I really appreciate them for what they've done for so many friends and for the state of Kentucky. But kind of where I got started in this, whenever COVID first hits, we hear numbers that could be 5%, 4%, 3% death loss. The Neil Ferguson model, which is kind of where all of the curve and all the ideology came from, thank God those experts were wrong. So I praise Jesus every day that we didn't have the loss of life that people were predicting, because it looked egregious. So myself, like so many other pastors, we're reasonable people. We took our services online, said, hey, if this is the Black Death, we don't want to expose our people to it. So I took all 4 of our campuses and we went online, and we were happy to do that. But as we watched and the numbers didn't come to pass they predicted, and other businesses started opening up and having liberty around us, yet we didn't have the same liberty, we started asking ourselves this question: is this religious targeting? And I believe the answer to that question is obvious. Yes, it was. The culmination for me is I was doing a Easter drive-through service where we were giving, candy-filled eggs to kids. Nobody was getting out of a car. The eggs have been packed 5 days in advance. Workers, less than 10 workers, wearing masks and gloves. I get a call in the state of Kentucky from the health department, Green River Health Department, telling me I cannot do that event. They'll shut me down. And that's an extension of Governor Beshear's office. And I complied that day. Now I wish I never would have complied, because the people of my church that put that event on, they're standing at our church and they're looking across the road at fast food places that have teenagers putting, French fries in cardboard boxes, the liquor store across the way serving its patrons, and coffee shops are pushing out lattes and brevets. But the message was the church isn't responsible enough to give some kids some candy in the name of Jesus or Easter eggs. And it really grieved my spirit. You could see it was an obvious violation of our First Amendment rights.
Yes.
So in response to that, we went to the parking lot the next Wednesday. We did a socially distanced, safe parking lot communion service. The governor said we couldn't do that. And I called all the press. I said, I'm going to serve communion safely and sanely, compassionately, but constitutionally. And we took I don't know if everybody's seen, or many people have seen, the prepackaged communion that all comes together. So we served that on the parking lot. The local press came out and covered it and really were positive, because they could tell that we were logical people. We thought these things out. We had protocol procedures in place, and that we weren't just wild-eyed, rebel rousers. But we were people that deeply care about Jesus, deeply care about our congregation, and also deeply care about the Constitution. So that's kind of the light bulb moment for us. And so after that, we put together peaceablygather.com.
Yes.
Where we started calling pastors, leaders all across America. Hey, it's time for you to bring your churches, your synagogues, your religious groups. It's not just a Christian issue, right? It's an American issue. Bring them back to the house of worship. Do it safely. Do it with caution. Do it with care. But don't let the government tell you when you can worship. Come on, we're in charge. It's we the people. The Constitution's the highest law in the land. Any governor that violates that, you don't have to follow his orders.
Sure. Let me jump into Kelly Shackelford, because, Kelly, you know this individual. And matter of fact, if you go to his website, which we have a link to, he features First Liberty.
Yeah, Brian's done a great job of really, speaking to a lot of the ridiculous things that have been going on, and even he went to Chicago, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Which,
we'll talk about the Romanians in just a minute.
A lot of activity.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is Brian had a church he has a church in Texas, but this stuff happened in Kentucky because some governors are acting differently than others. And so the governor in Texas was allowing churches to open back up, but the governor in Kentucky was doing some crazy things. And so I'm sure we can talk about more after the break, but I really appreciate Brian and his leadership. So many pastors around the country needed to know they weren't standing alone, and I think that's one of the great purposes of what he's been doing.
Let me just take a break, and when we come back, I do want to talk about that Romanian church, if nothing else. Last week I was supposed to be in Hungary speaking, and that didn't happen, but I'm very familiar with what's been happening in Romania. And imagine being in a country where you were not allowed to meet in churches, or if you were, with all sorts of restrictions, and then coming to the land of the free, and all of a sudden then all these restrictions placed upon you. And, of course, we just mentioned before we got started here that the Illinois governor has kind of changed his tune, but the mayor of Chicago, not so much. So we'll get into that. And if you find yourself saying, wait a minute, I want to find out more about what Brian Gibson's talking about, we have a link to his website, peaceablygather.com. And then if you scroll down, we also have a link to the YouTube videos that you can watch. So during the break, you might want to go to your computer and find some of that. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merrill Matthews, and Brian Gibson. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many colleges in America face a bleak financial future. They may have survived campus riots and protests in the past, but they may not weather the financial challenges they will face starting this fall. The virus pandemic has already altered university education, and that trend is likely to continue for the near future. College campuses are empty as more and more students are learning over the internet. When colleges open up again, will all of the 20 million college students return to the campus? A sizable number of those students may decide to take a year off rather than pay nearly $50,000 a year to take a limited number of classes online. Some colleges have indicated they might not even open in the fall. Either or both of these scenarios could spell financial disaster for colleges. Charles Fain Lehman explains in a recent column that universities have four sources of income: tuition, public funding, on-campus fees, and endowments. Tuition income drops when students decide to take a break from college. Fewer students impact on-campus fees like housing and food service, and financially strapped states may not be able to provide as much public funding for colleges. A few select universities will benefit from the generous endowments they have put away. Those funds are not equally distributed. One expert estimates that half of the value of all college endowments are held by just 3% of the schools. Small liberal arts colleges might not have survived even without the current economic downturn. This will certainly accelerate their departure. But even the state schools will face an uncertain future. If these colleges experience a 20 to 30% drop in revenue, many of them will face a financial crisis. We will see a significant change in the college landscape over the next few years. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Brian Gibson with us for just a few more minutes. Let me again encourage you to find out more about his website. And for those of you that are pastors, you might want to, first of all, go there, watch the video. Then, of course, there's some great information about our good friends at First Liberty. And then a place where you can sign the petition and support all of this. And then, of course, we have the videos as well that you can watch. And I thought, as we always, of course, always have, Dr. Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford in studio. Brian, talk about this particular situation, because we have been following for a couple of days the Romanian Pentecostal Church, which is in the Chicago area. Can you imagine growing up in Romania and facing all sorts of persecution, coming to this country, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're back in your home country, and you had a chance to travel there this weekend, so tell us what you found.
Yes, I got to spend some time and to minister. I preached at Elam Romanian Pentecostal Church, met their pastor and that church family, and his name is Pastor Christian Ionesco. And what a man of God, what a man of integrity. I was so impressed with this man, and he really educated me. I hope to be like him when I grow up. I'll say it that way. I want to grow into a man like him. But he did come from Romania, came, out of religious persecution, totalitarian government, and he told me these things that I was unaware of. He said that Romania had a First Amendment once upon a time like America does. And he said when he was a young man, it only took 800 communists to shut down and to move and to take the voice of the church and to bring persecution to them. And the things these people went through in their own nation were unspeakable. So they come to the land of the free, right? They come to Lady Liberty looking to practice their faith and looking for a new lease on life. And they're met with thuggery in Chicago by the mayor of Chicago, where they did things like towed all the cars around the church, actually backfired on the mayor because she towed some of just the neighborhood cars thinking they were church cars.
Oops.
Police officers blocked their drive. One of the moves from the mayor was something, and Kelly could probably speak to this more intelligently than I could, but I believe it's called total abatement, which I didn't know what that meant. I was eating with an attorney whenever that statement was made and it came across the news. And I asked this attorney, what is total abatement? He said, well, let me look it up. And what it means is if you're deemed a public nuisance, they can come in and in the most extreme example, they can tear your building down without due process. These are the kind of threats the mayor of Chicago was putting on this immigrant population. And so we went just to come and be a support, to stand with Pastor Christian, let him know we love him, and that, hey, if you got to go to jail for the preaching of the gospel and for your First Amendment rights, I would love to go with you. Because I believe it's men like him that make America, America. And I believe the nation needs to hear his voice right now. He has a message for America coming from his background. Really, really a special man and a special people.
Well, Brian, I really appreciate what you did going out there. And, I mean, it wasn't just going out there and preaching at his church, which was very important. But, I mean, you guys had to be in a bunch of press conferences and with a media that was trying to destroy not only, him and his church, but you as well. And at the same time that was going on, there was a police raid on an African-American church in Chicago. And by the way, this is the same mayor who violated her own order because she needed to get her hair done. So, I mean, this is just an incredible thing to watch. So tell us a little bit about what that was like. I mean, what was the media like? Because I'm guessing there was just a throng of media, and what were they trying to do? And help people understand a little bit of the battle, the atmosphere, the spiritual atmosphere that was going on, the warfare that was going on.
Well, I said it like this. I flew out of Chicago and came to Dallas to meet some friends, and it felt like I'd left China and landed in America when I got back to Dallas. But because that's the kind of atmosphere that was going on in Chicago. So, yeah, the press is trying to trap. They're unmarked people there taking pictures all the time of all of these Romanians, trying to catch them standing too close to each other or not having a mask on or just looking for any small infraction. These people are living under scrutiny. The mayor, obviously, there's a double standard there with that mayor. You can't get your hair cut in that city, but she can because she's the ruling caste, and everyone else is simply a peasant. I really have never seen in my lifetime a greater abuse of power, a greater abuse of an office in the United States of America. And it was like watching things that I've seen traveling the world and preaching in the persecuted church. My stepfather has given his life to ministering in the underground church, ministering in places you get killed for the preaching of the gospel. And I've been blessed to go with him and to learn and to see that through my formative years and still do things like that. And I've been there when communist authorities break in, interrogate pastors, bust up your meetings. You don't know where you're going to jail, or especially the people from those nations, what's going to happen to them. And I think that's the atmosphere. That's what it felt like. It felt like, like I was with the underground church in Vietnam, like the underground church in China. It felt totally different. And then the press is trying to trap you and get you to say the wrong things. And you're going to fall into a trap from time to time. But a lot of the statements will be, do you not care about the public safety or the health of these people? Right. That's a lot of the leading questions. Why can you not just have church online? And what I always say is it's amazing that the coronavirus is sophisticated enough that it only infects people in churches and synagogues, but it doesn't in big box stores.
Yes.
Right? When was the last time you heard a story about many people going to a Walmart, Costco, whatever it is? And I'm for all these businesses. I'm not against them, but I'm just saying, when did you hear the last story about a bunch of people getting infected at a grocery store? It's always a church, a synagogue, a house of worship, and that's agenda driven. So I think we got to speak to that. We got to hit that head on. That is a piece of propaganda, and it's propaganda to try to take away our First Amendment rights. Those guys were coming at us, and Pastor Christian did an incredible job with them, by the way. Incredible job.
Just before we run out of time in this segment, Brian, let's talk about how we can get people involved. There's a number of pastors that listen to this, seminary students, deacons, elders, people in some kind of leadership, and they can say, well, isn't that interesting? But we always encourage people to take some action, and there's an action item, which we have at peaceablygather.com, and that's a petition. Tell us what that involves and what you are looking for people to do.
Yes, sir. We're looking for every religious leader to go to peaceablygather.com. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. I believe he is the lamb, but he's also the lion. And right now, America needs some lions that will stand up and act. We need to roar. So I want pastors to go and sign up in peaceablygather.com and take their churches safely and sanely back into the house of worship. And let's make a public statement together that the church is united. Also, if you're a parishioner, someone that just cares, maybe you're not even a believer, but you care about the Constitution, you could also go to peaceablygather.com. There's a place for you to fill out as well and to sign the petition that, hey, we're going to go to houses of worship. We're going to be attending. We think this is an infringement on our religious liberties and our First Amendment rights. They can sign up right there. We're going to keep going. We'll be in California this weekend, standing against injustice there, and we're going to do this till every state in the union is free. After that, we want to see the Johnson Amendment torn to shreds, and then we want a never again campaign where Americans understand their rights, their religious liberties, and where we don't lay down like this again quickly. I think it's time for us to educate America and to let them know where their rights are, and not to let the fear factor get us to lay down our rights. So they could go to peaceablygather.com, stand with us, pray with us. I'd ask people to pray and fast, because it is the hour in America we have to act, because every day the church is closed, a bit of liberty dies.
Brian Gibson, thank you for joining us. We'll probably call on you again, no doubt. We're going to take a break, and we've got a lot more, I'm sure, that Kelly and Dr. Merrill Matthews have to say, but we need to take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
"2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We had a chance to hear from Brian Gibson, peaceablygather.com. You can go to that website. A little bit later, I might just mention as a program note, Pastor Tommy Nelson will be with us because as we are starting to see that some of these universities will still be online, some of the universities may not open up. Maybe a GAP program makes some sense. He's been on with us before talking about that, so we will be talking with him about that in the next hour. We'll get into, of course, the pandemic, get into the riots in Minneapolis and much more. But I thought, Kelly, for just a minute, since we talked about Illinois, I've got this article here that talks about how it does look like the Illinois governor decided to back off because if it went to the Supreme Court, it might not be so good. Got this one here about the Chicago mayor we talked about. And then, most importantly, we have a very good interview that you did just the other day on overreaching California. So Illinois, California tend to be right now the big issues that you've been dealing with, right?
Yeah, what's been happening is really, we've been fighting these all over the country. We started in Kentucky with the drive-in. Then we won the really significant victory for in-person services. We won that federal injunction that opened up all the churches all across Kentucky. And we're just, we're kind of fighting here and there, and it looked like the big things left that were still taking really unreasonable positions was California and Illinois, and especially Illinois, because the governor there,
Governor there, I'll let him sneeze, yeah.
Sorry about that. The governor there was just totally ridiculous. I mean, He said they weren't going to allow the church to open until
a vaccine,
until there was a vaccine, which might be never.
Yes.
And it was just crazy stuff, right?
Yeah. And
then you had the mayor there and the city health official in Chicago. I mean, you had, they threatened to essentially to bulldoze the church.
Yes.
Another African American church had a police raid on the church. Now, fortunately for them, they have their doors locked because they're in a very dangerous area, so the police couldn't get in. But there was a police raid on a church, an African-American church. I mean, so the stuff that was happening was just crazy. And so
it's just crazy.
What happened was you had, I think, two things going on. Number one is these are bad. If you're a politician, this doesn't look so good. Okay, and public opinion starts to turn. And when Brian said he was out there, I mean, they were doing a lot of press conferences. They're focusing on these immigrants from, another country who came here for freedom, and they're being threatened to have their church bulldozed, and an African-American church is being a police raid and all this. So add all that, so the PR is looking very bad for the governor at this point. Add that to the fact that they're now having to appeal. Not in Chicago, where the judges are very liberal, and not even the Seventh Circuit, which is more liberal. But who is the justice that's responsible on the Supreme Court for the emergency appeals? Justice Kavanaugh. Justice Kavanaugh, who's been a religious freedom guy his whole life. They knew where it was going. So it's just interesting how all these things kind of come together. Ultimately, though, it was the people, because the people were getting upset. The PR was looking bad. One of the reasons they elected Trump, probably the main reason people who elected Trump, was for judges. It's interesting how this all goes back to people.
Yeah.
But the result of that is the justice said he wanted the response from the Illinois attorneys by 8 o'clock last night, and like 3 hours before 8 o'clock, the governor took all of his restrictions off the churches. And so I think it was a combination of all of that. And very similar. And really, this kind of started a little bit with the president last week.
Right.
That was not a planned event. I mean, the president decided he wanted a press conference, and he wanted to speak to the fact that what was going on with the churches was wrong. And he did. And it kind of started something. So you had Minnesota governor come out just a day later. You had California. I mean, all these governors who were being really unmovable all of a sudden moved. And so it is interesting. I think we take this for granted. I mean, yes, we're winning lawsuits in court. Every lawsuit we filed during the pandemic, we've won. But the thing that really, really, really matters is the people. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if anybody saw the pictures of the people at Sacramento last week in California. I mean, you could turn in any direction, and it was people as far as you could see. And that's not just about church, but it's about church. And I think when that level of the people say, this is unacceptable, the politicians began to fold. And that's what's happening. Now, that is going to be the interesting thing about California. California, they were told they weren't going to be able to meet for 3 months. And they were like, well, that's unacceptable. And I don't care who you are, over 1,200 pastors signed saying we will be meeting. And they set Pentecost Sunday, this coming Sunday, for the time they would come back. And so the governor kind of flinched. Again, after the president spoke on Friday, he came out and said, okay, well, it's not going to be 3 months. It's not going to be immediate that you can start coming back. But I got some restrictions. You can only do it up to 25% or 100 people, whichever is the smallest
instead of the largest.
So if you're a 20,000 seat, auditorium, you could only have 100 people meeting there. Now, I didn't see that same restriction on Home Depot or any other large gathering facility. It's only on churches. And this is the problem with all of these, but especially California, is they discriminate. Now, I mean, what people don't realize is what they argued. What they argued in the Ninth Circuit, in their case, will be on its way. I was hoping you were going to bring that up.
Yes, and it's in the video, too, so, again, people can watch that.
They had two arguments that I think should chill people. Number one, they said, look, in an emergency, the government can restrict all constitutional rights as long as they are acting in good faith. I am not stretching. That is the main argument they had. I mean, you don't have a constitution if the government can declare an emergency, and as long as they're in good faith, you don't have any rights, okay? But then number two, the arguments come in, hey, you can't treat churches differently than all these other secular facilities. Do you know what the attorney's argument was? I mean, this is not like a theory. This is what they argued. They said that there was this is a quote, there's too great a risk that congregants would not follow the safety protocols. Okay, so evidently the people in the liquor stores, you can trust the social distance. The people in the grocery stores and the Home Depot, but you can't trust the people going to synagogue or church. Those people can't be trusted. Yeah. What an incredible, I mean, you want to know discrimination, there's discrimination for you. And it's not just like an accidental discrimination. They argued. It was their argument. So incredible. Now, of course, at the Ninth Circuit, they won. Yeah. They won with that. They won 2-1. But the dissent, Judge Collins did an excellent job just completely dismantling the foolishness of their arguments. Now, this would go to Justice Kagan, who you would think would probably be more sympathetic to San Francisco and the Ninth Circuit ruling. But the justice is not just them. They have to poll the other justices. Right. So, I think what's going to happen this weekend is 1,200 churches are going to open up. And I don't think they're going to go start arresting these pastors. We'll see. But if any of that begins to happen, I think you'll see the governor fold very quickly, just like the Illinois governors. I hope that's what happens, but we'll have to wait and see.
Might just mention that the interview they did, which was on Fox, was actually the first article we've posted here. We just entitled it "Overreach in California." But Dr. Merrill Matthews is a good example. You know, we can trust the people in the liquor stores. We can't trust the people in the churches, right?
Can't even. I mean, you can trust the politicians because they can go and apparently get their hair done and go to the gym in New York and other places, and that's fine. We just can't trust the people.
Yes. Well, if nothing else, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back. We'll get into some other issues, but we're saving a few very obvious ones, and that is, of course, we will, as we start the National Hour, talk about this horrible death that took place with George Floyd, and that's going to lead in a variety of different directions simultaneously. One, of course, is how to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. What kind of prosecution will take place because, of course, these 4 police officers were fired, but will they then be charged with second-degree murder or something of that nature? That also leads to a Twitter post by the president that was censored by Twitter, and that then leads to some other Twitter posts that were censored about mail-in ballots, which then leads to the executive order by the president, and so those are some issues. And, of course, don't forget, we also have the riots that we need to address. So there'll be a lot of issues that we'll be talking about, but we wanted you to also just have a chance to hear a little bit about what's happening in the churches. And, of course, when we join the National Hour, we'll talk about what's going to happen this weekend in California. Well, that coming up right after this.
Finally, states are allowing and encouraging businesses to reopen. But when they attempt to rehire laid-off workers, many employers are getting a surprising response. No, thank you. We actually should not be shocked by this, because the U.S. government has made unemployment pay better than work. The government created this disincentive to work last March by passing the CARES Act. The bill contained a provision many conservatives complained about, but allowed to go through in the rush to provide relief to companies and workers affected by coronavirus lockdowns. The CARES Act increased normal unemployment benefits by $600 per week, which equates to a $15 per hour minimum wage. According to a new economic working paper, more than 2/3 of laid-off workers are making more unemployed than they were at their jobs. 1 in 5 will make twice as much not working. Lower-wage workers benefit the most. The bottom 10%, mostly part-timers, will collect 3 times more if they remain unemployed. Libertarian commentator John Stossel aired a TV report on this. He featured the CEO of an Arkansas sawmill, who told him he simply cannot match the state's unemployment benefits. He said, "We haven't seen an application in weeks. If businesses cannot find qualified workers, the recovery will be slower." A guy who quit his job transporting hospital patients told Stossel, "My little girl is loving it." What about the patients? John Stossel says the $600 unemployment enhancement to the CARES Act made it so a law that was supposed to help people did the opposite of what politicians intended. Well, some politicians. The $600 per week boost to unemployment is supposed to expire July 31st, but there's an effort in Congress to extend it through January. John Stossel says workers who depend on handouts for too long descend into what social scientists call learned helplessness. The left is fine with using coronavirus relief to increase state power over our lives. We shouldn't be. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, just for a few more minutes, we're going to kind of go around the round table, and then in the National Hour, we'll get into, of course, the horrible death of George Floyd and all the things that have transpired since then. But I thought for just a minute I'd pick out this particular article, which comes from an article that was in Forbes. The most important figure of the pandemic is 43% of U.S. deaths are from 0.6% of the population. Dr. Merrill Matthews, let me come to you for just a minute, because indeed this is research that we've talked about before. If you look at some of the states, the percentages are even higher. But the reality is that around the country, almost half of the deaths have been in these nursing homes. 70% of the deaths in Ohio, 69% of the deaths in Pennsylvania have been in the nursing homes. And the reason I bring it up is, just as Kelly was pointing out just a minute ago, sometimes when you see the coverage of these churches, you have to have some discernment and say, how much are they just trying to find a gotcha question, and they're not honestly representing how responsible the church people are. Well, here's another one. I've heard somebody say the other day, every time people give you the death total, if they don't point out that so many of those were in the nursing homes, right, they're really, in some respects, deceiving you a little bit.
And when you get to the various states, when you get over on the West Coast, Oregon and Washington State, I think, Oregon especially, you're well into 60, 65%, some cases nearly 70% of the deaths have been people in nursing homes. So this is a tragedy this has been a tragedy for the nursing homes, but the laws have generally sort of applied to everyone, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Even if you wanted to say, coming into mid-March when they decided to start doing the lockdown, we didn't know all this, you can make that case, but you know it now. And so they're even trying to keep various types of social distancing and restrictions on people out in the parks, where I think there's almost virtually no cases of transmission out in the parks.
Yes.
I was thinking about this coming in today. I wouldn't have had a problem if a lot of these medical officials, the CDC, et cetera, would have said, this is what we think we know now, but, we're just learning it. Instead, we've gotten all these statements of truth that have been false.
Yes.
And I would never do that as an attorney. I would, I'd be out of business. And a lot of other people in their profession could never do that. And so I think what these people badly serve the American people. And I include people who are very, very knowledgeable, Fauci and these others, because they've said things like mask and other things that have contradicted one another. It's like, if you want to say we're not sure yet, but this is what we think, that would have been fine.
That's fine.
And that's not what they did. And so this situation with the nursing homes, I think we all knew very early that the elderly were at risk, were at great risk. The CDC is the one, I think, that sort of was the initiator of this situation of telling them, we're so concerned about the hospital beds that you need to send people back into the nursing homes. However, governors did not react the same. And I think that's important. You look at leadership and the people who, were thinking about what they were doing. And I mean, just take Cuomo versus DeSantis. I mean, you've got very different results because of their leadership. And I think people need to notice that. But I do put a lot of onus of this on the medical. I think of, my wife had cancer and breast cancer. And it was a very dangerous breast cancer. And at the end of the process, when, praise the Lord, all of the chemo and everything had worked and she was cancer-free, the doctor would not tell you she was cancer-free. The doctor would say there is no evidence of disease. I appreciate that, because the doctor is not telling you something that they don't know. They're telling you what they can tell you that they do know. And so it's wrong when these CDC officials and leaders say things that they don't know, because now you can't trust them. And I don't trust them, I'll be honest. And so I think they should have been much more careful about how they spoke, what they said, and that would have given more freedom for people to make their own decisions, including governors, right? That, we need to look at this and think through this. Thank goodness for people like DeSantis who, they were telling him, well, you're going to kill all your people. So, that's really risky what he did, to do something different than what they're telling you, because he was thinking. But I really put a lot of the onus and a lot of the blame on the folks who were speaking with these emphatic, truths that they didn't know.
And I would go even further, because watching the news in January and February up to mid-March, you saw people, experts and pundits on the news, actually mocking people who were wearing masks.
Yes.
Because they would say, it doesn't help you, especially unless you have the N95 and you've got it specially fitted and so forth, and it doesn't help anybody else. And it was almost sort of you hayseeds who just don't understand, like us elites, that this just doesn't help you. And now they want to force everyone to wear a mask. And now they're even talking about you ought to wear your mask in the house with your family. It's amazing, the flip flop.
And they even said it could be damaging for you to wear the mask because you're collecting.
Right, yeah, right.
And plus you tend to get this false sense of security.
Right. That's exactly right.
and build up the carbon dioxide. And since we're talking masks, this came out just the other day. April Ballard, as World Health Organization, now saying if you do not have any respiratory symptoms such as fever, cough, or runny nose, you do not need to wear a mask. At the same time, when the CDC says, in light of this new evidence, the CDC recommends wearing a cloth face covering in public while social distancing measures are difficult to maintain. So you get two different views from the World Health Organization, which is supposed to be the gold standard according to Twitter, right? And the other. And then you've got some of these stories which are actually pointing out, this one, for example, from Ergonomics Journal. There's also one from the Annals of Internal Medicine that just point out what Kelly says, that if you wear a mask, you build up a lot of CO2, and that can hurt you with respiratory issues as well.
It's just
Who do I believe?
and you had this week, Joe Biden essentially mocking President Trump for not wearing a mask, while Joe Biden does, and his wife, and it looks so strange, just the two of them walking over to the memorial.
And we did talk about that earlier in the week, where Britt Hume finally says this is one of the reasons why Donald Trump does not wear a mask, because he's got the sunglasses and the black, and it covers all of that, and it looks like something out of a horror movie. And he's standing next to his wife, nobody else, and he's got a mask outside. And we're supposed to take all this seriously. And back to the issue, humility would be a really good thing right now, and being willing to apologize. And I'll give Dr. Fauci partial credit, because on one case he did. But even today, I got two different stories. One which is saying that you don't really need a mask. World Health Organization, CDC, still adamant about the fact you need to wear a mask. Who do I believe?
That's one of the things. Even with these guidelines, when they came out from the governors, some governors had requirements, and they backed them by criminal penalties and all this. And then some governors had them be guidelines. And again, there's a lot of wisdom there to say, these are what we think. But number one, we care enough about freedom, and number two, we trust you. You make your own decisions. Risk yourself at your own risk, but I mean at your peril. But I think that was important too, and that's really all the governor of Illinois just did with regard to churches. He didn't really change his order; he just changed from requirements to guidelines. And so that all of a sudden the churches now are not being criminalized.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about this idea of these guidelines and the pandemic. Then we'll talk about a GAP program, because I just don't think those 20 million college students that everybody expects to land on the university campuses are going to go there. So rather than playing video games in the basement, maybe they could go to a GAP program. We'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today. It is the Friday edition, of course, of our weekend edition, and we have a number of individuals in studio with us today. Kelly Shackelford, who's the president and CEO of First Liberty Institute, and Dr. Merrill Matthews, who is the resident scholar for the Institute for Policy Innovation. We've got a lot to cover in the next couple of hours. Of course, we will focus some time and attention on just the horrible death of George Floyd. The former officer who placed a knee on him has now been arrested, so we'll talk about some of that, but it also relates to some other things we'll be talking about. Of course, the riots, but in addition to that, the Twitter post by the president was censored by Twitter, and that plays into one of the other Twitter posts by him about the whole issue of voting by mail, and so that has then led to an executive order the president has signed, and so we'll certainly talk about some of those issues as well. We also have some information about how many deaths actually have taken place in the nursing homes compared to the rest. But also, I think, Kelly Shackelford, I might come to you for just a minute, because one of the articles we've posted here is a piece that actually an interview you did on overreach in California. I just looked this up, and we have about 1,200 pastors, and they're estimating maybe as much as 3,000 churches in California may be meeting this Sunday, Pentecost Sunday. And while the state of Illinois and the governor has eased restrictions and in-person worshiping there, some of that still hasn't happened in California. So we've got a lot of things going on around the country right now, don't we?
Yeah, the interview you're referencing that you put on pointofview.net with Shannon Bream was because the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco had ruled 2-1 to not allow the churches to open under the Constitution. It's really it's a bizarre opinion if you read it. It's maybe 3 or 4 sentences of analysis by the majority that say, you churches don't have any constitutional rights, versus a long dissent that just completely dismantles their whole case. So I think if it were ever to get to the light of day at the Supreme Court, it would be overruled. I just don't know that it's going to happen, because I think the president started a momentum, or we've been filing these lawsuits for the last 2 months. As we were talking before air, it was like, hey, everybody's getting a break, and I'm like, well, not us. We're working 24/7.
First Liberty is working like they've never worked before.
Usually you do a lawsuit, and it takes, months to years to get through the process. But what we're having to do now is react quickly, and things are happening within 48-hour. We're in front of a federal judge all over the country. We're maybe 2 or 3 in the same day. So it's just
by internet.
Yeah, because it's all Zoom or whatever. And so you can actually do things much quicker, thank goodness. But you have to, because the church service is like in 2 days. I mean, that's, the Easter case we won, that was filed on Good Friday. So it's just crazy how fast all this is happening. And so while we're winning a number of these lawsuits, it's really, the momentum was caused by people getting to protest, people standing up and saying this is unacceptable. And then when the president threw down last week and said churches are essential and they need to open up immediately, that really pushed it even more. And so what you had to happen in California, where they were really about to have a real showdown, you had the Attorney General's Office of the United States send a letter saying, look, you're discriminating. your orders are treating churches and religious groups differently than secular groups, and that is not allowed. Hello, yes. And so after the president's statement last Friday, 2 days later, the governor, for the first time, he had said it'll be 3 months before the churches come back. All of a sudden, 2 days later, it's okay, you can open immediately, but I have some restrictions for you. And again, they're not restrictions that they place on other entities. And it's, you can open with 25%. You might think, well, that, that's reasonable. Or 100 people, whichever is lowest. And you're like, okay, now wait a second. I mean, you can't say there's a 20,000-foot facility, 20,000-seat facility, and you can only have 100 people. That's just, that doesn't make any sense. And so I think we're going to have a little bit of a showdown this weekend because it's Pentecost Sunday. The churches had already decided across California, while we want to be respectful, and they have been, we ultimately answer to God, not to Governor Newsom. And we are going to open this Sunday. This is Pentecost Sunday. We're going to open. We're going to do it safely. We're going to be very reasonable, probably much more reasonable than all the secular businesses and establishments and facilities. But we're going to open. And so we're going to see what happens this weekend.
Kelly, quick theological question. So Christians are admonished to obey the laws of the land. We have to be the best citizens out there. And when the state started doing the lockdown, I think the vast majority of churches said, okay, we'll go along with that right now. Mm-hmm. Something changes at some point, and the churches are beginning to push back. Where do we draw that line between being good citizens and now saying we can no longer abide by this?
Yeah, obviously the first answer is that the law of the land is not Governor Newsom, it's the United States Constitution. So ultimately they are still following the law of the land. But I do think what you're talking about, the continuum of this, is if you analyze the constitutional analysis, fundamental rights are never absolute, right? I mean, you could say I have a freedom of religion, but that doesn't mean you can sacrifice your children if you think that's your religion, right? If the government has a compelling governmental interest like public health or safety, they do have a right to infringe upon even your most fundamental right, as long as they're doing so in what they say is the least restrictive means possible. Well, that argument works if they're doing something to protect lives, like in this, and it really is for that purpose. You can't say something is narrowly tailored or least restrictive means when you're applying it to churches but not to the other groups. That doesn't work, okay? I don't know what you're doing, but it's clearly not public health and compelling, or it would have compelled you to do the same thing to that
stores.
Group. Yeah.
The big box stores.
And so what you're doing instead is you're saying somehow churches are less valuable. Churches are not as important. And we're on the other side. Churches are protected under the First Amendment, free speech, freedom of assembly, free exercise of religion. In fact, they're probably much more protected than those other entities. So I think what happened is everybody's watching. They want to give the government the benefit of the doubt to protect public health. But when they start misusing that to take away people's liberties in a discriminatory fashion, constitutionally, they're in big trouble. And so I think the churches have tried to be respectful, and they want to be safe, and they want to learn everything first. But now they're realizing we can be much safer than these other people, and the church is very important. The word ecclesia, which is church, means coming together. And so it's not just a side thing for churches to come together. It's the meaning of church.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, one of the questions a lot of people have been asking is if a young person graduates from high school and decides maybe this isn't the year to go to college right away. We're going to be talking with Pastor Tommy Nelson, your pastor, by the way, Dr. Matthews, on the GAP program. We've talked with him before. We're going to mention that, and then we'll get back into, of course, all sorts of issues in the news. But we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many colleges in America face a bleak financial future. They may have survived campus riots and protests in the past, but they may not weather the financial challenges they will face starting this fall. The virus pandemic has already altered university education, and that trend is likely to continue for the near future. College campuses are empty as more and more students are learning over the internet. When colleges open up again, will all of the 20 million college students return to the campus? A sizable number of those students may decide to take a year off rather than pay nearly $50,000 a year to take a limited number of classes online. Some colleges have indicated they might not even open in the fall. Either or both of these scenarios could spell financial disaster for colleges. Charles Fain Lehman explains in a recent column that universities have 4 sources of income: tuition, public funding, on-campus fees, and endowments. Tuition income drops when students decide to take a break from college. Fewer students impact on-campus fees like housing and food service, and financially strapped states may not be able to provide as much public funding for colleges. A few select universities will benefit from the generous endowments they have put away. Those funds are not equally distributed. One expert estimates that half of the value of all college endowments are held by just 3% of the schools. Small liberal arts colleges might not have survived even without the current economic downturn. This will certainly accelerate their departure. But even the state schools will face an uncertain future. If these colleges experience a 20 to 30% drop in revenue, many of them will face a financial crisis. We will see a significant change in the college landscape over the next few years. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Dr. Merrill Matthews, Kelly Shackelford in studio with us. We hopefully will connect up with Pastor Tommy Nelson in just a minute, but before we do so, I thought we might also, we've talked about California, let's talk about Illinois. We have a number of listeners in Illinois, and they probably right now are trying to figure this out because just at least 2 days ago, the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, was putting all sorts of restrictions on in-person worship services, and then all of a sudden reversed. And people have suggested that there might be a reason because it would go to the Supreme Court. Tell us more.
Well, I mean, we had a lot of churches we were representing in Illinois, and it was very dangerous what the governor was doing. We had DAs we were talking to, and essentially they said if you open your church and somebody actually, because of what the governor's doing, if you open your church and then somebody actually, gets ill and dies, we might have to come after you as a pastor for, criminally negligent homicide. I mean, so if you're a pastor and you're like, good grief, it put them in a very difficult situation. And, of course, you had this very unreasonable positions that the churches weren't going to be allowed to open up again until there was a vaccine found. Okay, well, that could be maybe never. And it's like, so this governor was totally out of control. And then you had, though, and I don't think the governor necessarily wanted all these things to happen, so I think it helped lead to where we are now, which is you had, the situation with these immigrants in this church in Chicago who brought their lawsuit, and you had the mayor who was out of control in Chicago, and you had them, the cars towed, including neighbors' cars big mistake. They weren't going to church there. But so they were just trying to bully this immigrant church.
In the Romanian. Yeah.
Yes. And these are people who escaped, totalitarianism and came to the United States. So that was bad. Then you had the raid on the African American church for having church. Not a good thing, right? And then, meanwhile, this Romanian church was appealing. And again, they had very liberal judges in Chicago and then the Seventh Circuit. But when you get to the Supreme Court, the justice responsible for that circuit is Justice Kavanaugh.
Oh.
And Justice Kavanaugh is a very strong protector of religious freedom. And so Justice Kavanaugh said, I want your brief from the state of Illinois by 8 o'clock on Thursday night. And so I really believe what happened is Pritzker was looking at this and going, I'm sure his political advisors were going, this is not good. Oh, by the way, the one thing I missed is the health official there in Chicago said that they were going to possibly declare the church a nuisance, which would mean you could bulldoze the church to the ground. So these are really bad political moves. And I think the governor realized, I don't want to look, this could be the end of my career. It would look really bad. And at the same time, you're going to the Supreme Court with Justice Kavanaugh. So all that together, right before the brief was due, the state of Illinois, the governor announced that all of his restrictions on churches were over and they're now just guidelines. And so he completely backed down, and the churches are now free in Illinois to safely meet, for their in-person services, as every church would want to do anyway. The discrimination, and that's the problem with these things, is now over. They're treating the churches differently than they are secular establishments, and that kind of discrimination is not allowed. And I think they would have lost in court eventually, but we won't ever know because it's over at this point.
Kelly, my sense is most of the ones that we've seen in the media of the churches are generally more conservative, evangelical type churches. Have there been groups that you would consider more liberal churches jumping in there? Have there been mosque or synagogues?
I haven't seen a lot of mosque. I have seen synagogues. Of course, New York, and you've had a number of run-ins with Orthodox Jews in New York. Now, those are Jewish, more conservative congregations. But, the African-American church in Chicago that the police raid occurred on, not a conservative church. So, I think this goes across across, denominations and across. You had the Lutherans and the Catholics in Minnesota bringing a lawsuit. We were talking to a number of these folks in Illinois to do the same. So it's I think it's sort of everybody coming together and saying, this doesn't make sense what you're doing. In many, many places what you find is that, for instance, again, I think what they said in California just said it all, right? The argument was there, and this is the Ninth Circuit opinion that came down, but the argument by the churches was, we're looking at your order, and your order treats us differently solely because we're religious. Mm-hmm. Now, if the order was, how many people are in attendance? What is the size of the facility? If it was based on those type of things, that would have been probably fine. But that's not what they're doing. They're saying if you're a secular establishment, you can have people come in, and you can do social distancing, and you can do this. But if you're a church, you can't do that. And again, you'd think, well, what's the rationale for that? They said, this is what they argued, the attorneys argued. They said that there was too much risk that congregants would not follow the safety protocol. So you can the government trusts the people in the liquor stores and the marijuana dispensaries and the grocery store and the Home Depot, but you can't trust the people that are going to the synagogue and the church. The reality is the churches and synagogues are going to be much more safe. There's not people running in and out all the time. Everything is being disinfected. Do you really think when you go to like a grocery store that maybe you're the first person to touch that thing that you just touched? or that it's been, you don't see people following every person to disinfect everything that's being touched and put back on the shelf, right? Mm-hmm. The churches are going to be much more safe than any of these other places, but they're being treated the opposite. And that's just discrimination, and it doesn't work once you get to a court that's trying to follow the law and the Constitution.
You know, and if you would like to listen to one of the interviews we did that's not on the National Hour, we did a short interview with Brian Gibson of Peaceably Gather, and he was talking about all the things that they were doing in Chicago to try to be safe. And when the press came out and watched him, I said, well, yeah, I guess you're probably a lot safer than what you're going to get in the liquor store, the grocery store, or anything like that. And so it is almost hard to pass the straight face test with some of the arguments made in the Ninth Circuit Court. So we'll see where that goes.
Look, you wonder, because everybody always asks, why are they doing this? Why, and people say, well, they're targeting churches, and they're discriminating against churches. Why they're doing that? I think most of them. I think the government is the most dangerous when they think they're taking care of you. That's when because they have good motives, so the ends justify whatever means they engage in. And a lot of these people, these governors, have probably never even been to church. And they have their own preconceptions. And so when they create their orders, they do so on how they see the church. Well, those are big gatherings of people, and they're dangerous. So we got to treat them differently than every other situation that really is the same. And so there's just a lot of discrimination that is because they don't understand. They've never bothered to listen. They haven't set, what would you do if this was legislation? You'd have people arguing all sides. You'd have people testifying. You'd have people looking at this and going, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's not constitutional. This is why we have a legislative system and not an edict from our governors and our mayors and our county officials, because they don't know what they're doing. They're incompetent because they're not going through a good process to get to the result.
Well, let's take a break, and we will then, when we come back from the break, chat with Pastor Tommy Nelson. We've connected up with him, but something that maybe sets up the conversation is my Viewpoints commentary today. This was, it's mostly just a coincidence. You write these a week ahead of time, but I talked about college finances and pointed out that a lot of these colleges get some of their income from tuition, some from student fees and housing, some from the states, and then some from endowments. But if you're a private school, you only get the first two, and so that's going to mean that some of them are not going to survive. And so we spent some time talking about that. And there's lots of evidence to suggest that the 20 million college students that are supposed to arrive on university campuses this fall, some of them are not going to. So what can we possibly provide for them in your church? Well, instead of having them play video games in their parents' home, maybe they could be involved in a GAP program, and we've had Pastor Tommy Nelson on to talk about the GAP program that he has done at Denton Bible Church, and I'd like to have some of you that are pastors listening to consider what you might do on that as well. So we're going to take a break, and we'll come back and chat with him briefly, and then we'll get into all sorts of other issues in the news. But if nothing else, you got a pretty good update already on this issue of religious liberty, and if you'd like to know more about what's happening at First Liberty, we have a link there. And most importantly, I encourage you to support them. They're as busy as they've ever been, and they need your financial support, so you can go to their website, and we'll continue our conversation right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
How many kids will end up on the college campuses this fall? I suspect some of them are going to rethink what they want to do for a variety of different reasons. But even if they are thinking about heading to college, sometimes I think a GAP program is a really good idea. And I've spoken at a number of those in a number of different states over the years. And then the other day we had Tommy Nelson and another one of his associates on the program to talk about the GAP program there at Denton Bible Church. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, you suggested we might get him back on because if nothing nothing else, we want people to know about his program, but also to encourage pastors and other churches to say this would be just a great opportunity to educate our future leaders.
They had a very good presentation when they first started talking about this, about some of the things that high school students coming out just simply don't know about life. A lot of us came out of high school kind of green, weren't quite ready for life.
Yes.
We went ahead and went to college anyway. But Tommy set this up along with Drew Anderson there, and it has been, I think they consider it very successful, and I think they're starting their first or second or third year. But Tommy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. We're starting our second year, starting here in September.
Give us a little bit of an outline about how the Denton Bible Church program works.
Well, what you do is a kid costs $3,500 to get into it, and you need to have about $300 a month that you can that can be paid your way because you don't work. What you do is it's like full time in the program, and you study theology. They meet with me for 1 hour a week, and we study Bible. They will study apologetics, and they will study about life, about every aspect about how to make it in life. Because all of us, we're college guys and seminary guys, and we know how people can go through a seminary or college and then go wreck his life, because he can't make it in life. And so they study everything from marriage to morality to work ethic to every area of life. And then they study physical skills. He'll show them all how to bring down a deer, how to skin a deer, how to cook a deer, eat a deer, how to do auto mechanics. And so it's kind of like you're working with theology, you're working with life, and you're working with creation. To where when the last weekend they have is a survival test, and they all go out and they can make knives, they can do woodcraft, they can work with machine craft, and so it's to get a kid ready. And really, the biggest deal, buddy, is it's to get a kid ready for secular humanism. Because as you, myself, Kerby knew, when we went to college, Dr. Kerby went to Berkeley. Okay. When you go to college, it's to prepare you to get out and get a living. Well, now college is committed to destroy the idea of an infinite personal God that has given His Word, His Son, and His salvation. It's going to come with a different view of sexuality, morality. It removes everything except man, and we're not sure who man is. And so we would see a lot of times these kids go through high school, go through college, and get destroyed in their faith because it ain't that difficult to manipulate an 18, 19-year-old kid. And so these, 50, 60-year-old professors would just destroy them. And we just said that's not going to happen. So what we did is we set up a program where there are a number of us, myself, Drew Anderson, a number of us, we commit ourselves to taking kids. They have host families that they live with, and they watch life for an entire year. They study, and we get them ready so that when we finish, if you want to go get into college, go ahead, but you're going to know all the arguments. And what we wanted to do is we're going to take 12 boys a shot, and then here in a little bit, we're going to take 6 girls and then 12 girls. So we would like to take 24 a year. And then what we would like to do, Kerby and Merrill, is we would like to see churches all over the United States that start having GAP programs, GAP, God's Alternative Program, to where they take high school kids, and before we send them out into the chipper, into the mulcher, to get ground up by professional atheists, that we would like to take them and give them a reformed education, how to make it in life, and basically just kind of reparent them and to get them ready for life. So I would like to see this, be honest, sweep the United States so that we can stand in the face of this, First John ends with guard yourself from idols, with this idol of man that has been raised up that is just killing us in Western Civ and in America, that we can turn out a group of kids that are kind of like Daniels and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego's, are kind of like Ezra, that set his heart to know the law of the Lord, to do it and teach teaches statutes. He just said, these refugees have gone back to the Holy Land, but Ezra recognized they hadn't touched the Bible in 70 years. They don't have a clue. They don't know Genesis from Reader's Digest. And so he said, I'm going to take these guys and I'm going to teach them. And that was Ezra's deal, that we've got a temple, we're going to have a wall, but we have an ignorant generation of people. So Ezra said, I'm going to do it. And if you remember, he went and got him a big old mess of priests to go with him. And they went back and started teaching the Jews and getting them ready to be independent in the land.
Tommy, Kelly Shackelford.
Hey, Kelly.
I know you've done so many things through the years. You've had these discipleship programs for young men before they really got going. Some of those people are like, well-known national pastors and other leaders. You've done a number of those things, and I know you've been real involved with a number of the people that were in Kanakuk, and I know Kanakuk has like a Gap Year and a K Institute. Right. How does what you're doing fit with all that? What caused you to do this? And then if you're a pastor listening to this, or maybe just somebody who wants to go talk to their pastor, how can they find out what you're doing in a way to sort of, think about doing it in their church?
Any pastor that wants to do this, give me a call. I mean, call me at my home at 940-382-0539. Call me, and I'll talk to him, and I'll show him how we did it. Because basically, what you've got to have is one guy in your church that he's on staff, he's a retired guy that has the freedom to know Bible, to know life, and to know craft, to be able to show a kid how to change a flat. Mm-hmm. And he can recruit all the people around him that can do, because he can't do all those things, but he can get the people to do Bible, to do theology, to do apologetics, to do history, and how we got to secularism. How do you go from Socrates to Shirley MacLaine? How do you go from Athens to Kerby Anderson? All right, to Berkeley. So
I'm sure catching in the neck today, aren't I? Let me just mention real quickly that we do have a link to gap.dentonbible.org. So that's on the website, and you can see stewardship, stamina, and skills. But go ahead, because what you're really encouraging is for other people to learn. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can learn from you, can't they?
No, they don't. The way I got into this was, I know, Kerby, you have heard of William Tennant, that began the Log Cabin College.
Mm-hmm.
And he took like 18 kids, I think it was, that ultimately the Log College became Princeton. And he said, I've got kids. I don't want to send them back to England and make them Anglicans. He said, there's no place to send them here. And, Harvard had become liberal. And Yale, he was afraid of Yale. And so what he did was he just took young men, and this Presbyterian pastor, William Tennant, one was his kid Gilbert, and he taught them for years. Every day, just taught them like a college, but he taught them theology, taught them Bible, taught them all that they needed to know. And that ultimately became the religious department of Princeton University. And those guys he taught, a lot of them signed the Declaration. They were men of the Constitution. They were the founders of American Religious Society. And out of that came Charles Hodge, B.B. Warfield, Gresham Machen. I mean, all of the stuff got built on it. Well, I heard Dr. John Hanna teach that back in 1978. Okay. I think, Kelly, were you a human in 78?
I was.
Barely?
And he was in that class, probably.
I took Hanna. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he taught that. And I remember Hanna looking at us and saying that most evangelists at the end of their careers become educators, because they realize that even though broadcasting is marvelous, to have true lasting fruit, you got to do what Jesus did. And you got to take a guy and expose him. We try to do it in the universities, but we expose them to the wrong stuff. We didn't used to, but we do now. Not that there aren't great educators in those systems, but we ruin them now. And so he said that is the way you change people, is that you take them and expose them, like Moody did evangelism, but then he started Moody Bible. And Finney started Oberlin, and Billy Graham went to Northwestern.
Let's take a break, and we'll come back and finish the statements right after these important messages.
Finally, states are allowing and encouraging businesses to reopen. But when they attempt to rehire laid-off workers, many employers are getting a surprising response. No, thank you. We actually should not be shocked by this, because the U.S. government has made unemployment pay better than work. The government created this disincentive to work last March by passing the CARES Act. The bill contained a provision many conservatives complained about, but allowed to go through in the rush to provide relief to companies and workers affected by coronavirus lockdowns. The CARES Act increased normal unemployment benefits by $600 per week, which equates to a $15 per hour minimum wage. According to a new economic working paper, more than 2/3 of laid-off workers are making more unemployed than they were at their jobs. 1 in 5 will make twice as much not working. Lower-wage workers benefit the most. The bottom 10%, mostly part-timers, will collect 3 times more if they remain unemployed. Libertarian commentator John Stossel aired a TV report on this. He featured the CEO of an Arkansas sawmill, who told him he simply cannot match the state's unemployment benefits. He said, "We haven't seen an application in weeks. If businesses cannot find qualified workers, the recovery will be slower." A guy who quit his job transporting hospital patients told Stossel, "My little girl is loving it." What about the patients? John Stossel says the $600 unemployment enhancement to the CARES Act made it so a law that was supposed to help people did the opposite of what politicians intended. Well, some politicians. The $600 per week boost to unemployment is supposed to expire July 31st, but there's an effort in Congress to extend it through January. John Stossel says workers who depend on handouts for too long descend into what social scientists call learned helplessness. The left is fine with using coronavirus relief to increase state power over our lives. We shouldn't be. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention we have Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merle Matthews, and we still have by phone Tommy Nelson, who is the senior pastor at Denton Bible Church. You can click on the button that shows his website, or we also right beneath it have God's Alternative Program, the GAP program. And since we had to go to one of those mandatory breaks, I thought I might just let you, Pastor Tommy Nelson, finish off your comment, because if nothing else, as we look through the history of the church, we've recognized the importance of pouring into a number of individuals. Yep. And you've been doing that with your Young Guns program and speaking at Kennecott Institute and all the rest. But you would like to encourage a number of pastors listening right now to think about doing a GAP program at their own church.
Yep. You know, you would like to think, and originally, Kerby, I thought, you know, you could just make a whole lot of great teaching tapes to go out on secular humanism, the rise of it, what it's done, this and this and this. But really, we found out that when you take an 18-year-old, that it's like reparenting. It's like big brothers. You've got to get your hands on them, because so many of them have come out of just dysfunctional homes. 1 out of 6 of them has been sexually abused. And so you've got to get your hands on them. And same with girls. About 1 out of 4 girls have been sexually abused. And so next year, we're going to start a girls program to take girls and guys, and they, you just got to take them and start trying to show them this mess of a country that we're in. How did we get here? Like you and I, you're a Berkeley boy, I'm a North Texas guy. We were there when the shift came. We saw it. But you've got to take these guys now and to say, this is how we got here. This is what has happened. And this is the high road. You remember in our day a guy named Francis Schaeffer that came on.
Oh, yes.
And he started doing things different and started showing a whole group of people the way that it ought to be done. And so that's what we do.
Tommy, do you accept anybody who applies, or is there a vetting process?
There is a vetting process. We basically, Merrill, have to know that boy has a motor. In other words, it's not a rehab program. We don't have time to rehab a kid. But he's got to be committed to – we don't want him dating for a year. There's going to be times we don't want him on his on all his software. We want him off of it. He's got to be able to submit to authority. We're going to put him with a host family. He's got to be able to get along. And so but we have to know that he's teachable. Really, that's all you ever need with a guy is to have a teachable kid. And if he's that, we kind of check him. We interview him to make sure that we're not having a parent drop their kid on the front door. But if we've got a teachable kid, and he can, and it's going to cost about $3,500 because he's, it's basically like being in a junior college. We're taking him for a whole year, and one of our staff is pouring into this guy 30 hours a week. We're pouring into him. And so we just finished having 6 kids, and every one of them said this was the greatest year of his life.
I believe it.
One of them came to know the Lord while we were there. We don't care what background he's out of. We show them the doctrinal stance that we have, and he's got to be willing to not be argumentative with it, but to listen to us. But we just pour into these guys. I think in the old days, maybe you could sit them down and lecture them, and you can't do it anymore because they are the frogs in the boiling water, and they're not even aware that they are being stewed in their own grease.
Wow.
And so you just got to have hands-on with them.
Well, again, the God's Alternative Program, or the GAP program, we have information about that on our website. And from what I'm hearing from you, Tommy Nelson, if a pastor says, look, I need to talk to you, you're quite willing to take that phone call.
Kerby, if that pastor doesn't get those kids in his church, they're going to go out and get mulched. I mean, unless you send them to out to Falwell, what do you call it, Liberty?
Mm-hmm.
Unless they go to Liberty, unless they go to Cedarville, unless they go to DBU or someplace, they're going to be in trouble. They're going to get ground up. And so we'll take them. And I would like to see, Kerby, about 10 million churches in our country, just like the old Sunday school program was something that started in the 1800s, to where, and professionals did it, and the churches all looked up in the West and said, hey, this is too important. For paid guys, we got to do this. And so I would like to see it become a standard American Protestant staple that we will take every kid and we'll educate that kid on how we got to where we are. Remember Schaeffer's How Should We Then Live?
Mm-hmm.
Where he showed us, here's why we got in this mess. And here we're rotting away in our sins, Ezekiel. How should we then survive or live? We got to make some changes. And so this is the only way you can do it.
Well, Jim, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
That's a pretty motley group you got there. So I hope you don't go out to eat with these guys.
Would you have accepted us in your GAP program?
Get with me later.
Again, Pastor Tommy
I
Nelson
had nobody
and the GAP program.
out my discipleship like other than Kelly Shackelford, I would be a happy guy.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's just before we take a break, a couple of other articles that we've posted here today. We have information about the GAP program, which we talked about, and we talked about overreach in California. I thought this is a pretty quick one. One of the articles we've posted here from Forbes, most of the deaths, 43%, and by the way, the author argues that may even be low, are actually those that took place in nursing homes. And for our listeners in Ohio, that's up to 70%. For our listeners in Pennsylvania 69%. Don't have a lot of listeners in the state of Washington or other places, but again, Kelly, it illustrates again back to the point we made about the churches. People aren't going to churches catching it and dying. This is happening in very specific areas, which we, as we open up, need to have some protection.
Yeah, I wanted people to get that again, right? 0.6% of the population, not even 1% of the population, 0.6% of the population is 43% of the deaths. It really speaks to the fact that what's happening in our nursing homes has been really a tragedy. And some governors have done a wonderful job, and they protected the people in the nursing homes, but unfortunately, a number of the governors made some horrible mistakes. Cuomo would be one of those, but a number of them did, where they sent people with the coronavirus back into the nursing homes, and we've just had a disaster occur there. But it does tell us what we need to be doing going forward, which is this is where we need protection. We need to be wise, but people need to realize when they see these numbers, they're actually really much larger than they need to be because of our lack of care in a number of these states and what's happened in the nursing homes.
And Kelly has talked about that in terms of the nursing homes, but Dr. Merrill Matthews, you talked about the fact that that was intentional because they didn't want to discriminate against anybody that had COVID-19.
Right. The New York Times reported that was an intentional decision, and it was the Department of Health in New York issued an order to the nursing homes saying you have to accept anyone who comes there, and explicitly prohibited them from testing anybody. They were supposed to be people who were coming stable, but nobody. They could have still been infectious. They could have still been contagious to other people, but the state of New York prohibited a nursing home from even testing them to see if they might still be infectious.
As you pointed out, this wasn't due to the science. This was due to basically social justice, right?
Social justice. We don't want to discriminate against somebody. If a guy wants to walk into a girl's bathroom, who are we to tell him they can't do it? That'd be discrimination. Same thing here.
So again, that is one of your articles we posted last week, in case people had not had a chance to hear that. When we come back, what about Twitter? What about big tech? What about the censorship of the president's tweets? If they can censor the president, I think they can censor you. So we got a lot more to talk about. We will do so right after this.
(2020). Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week. in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
We are privileged to have this hour, a conversation that we're going to have about Twitter and big tech and a number of other things with Dr. Merle Matthews and Kelly Shackelford. And if you have been following through, we have a number of articles. The third one there, Big Tech Executive Order. And that one is from Breitbart. But I love how the Wall Street Journal started. Where would President Trump be if his critics didn't help him so often? The latest case they're talking about is Twitter, when they decided to fact check Mr. Trump's tweet about, of all things, mail-in ballots. Now, if you wanted to fact check Donald Trump, I don't know, Joe Scarborough fits into that category. Maybe his most recent one about when the looting starts, the shooting starts. But the one that they picked to start a fight over is whether or not mail-in ballots might possibly lead to voter fraud. Now, that one I just think is one of those intuitively obvious statements. But let's go around the round table. Dr. Merle Matthews, what about this? Because Twitter says that there is no evidence that mail-in ballots are linked to voter fraud, which would come as a big surprise to a variety of individuals that have worked in the elections area.
Including North Carolina, where there was some ballot harvesting there. So I'm mystified by this. But let me ask Kelly a question, because they're talking about this as Twitter censoring President Trump. But in most cases, they're just putting a notice on there saying we're checking that. So do you have to if you stop people from seeing it, that's what I typically think of censor. If you're just putting a tag on there, is that still censoring?
Yeah, well, I mean, technically, censoring can only occur by the government, right? I mean, the government you don't have free speech except versus the government. But what's happening with Twitter and Facebook and Google and all these groups is there's a federal law called the Communications Decency Act, and you know, the way things normally work, let's say the Washington Post quotes, Kerby Anderson in something he said. And somebody can not only sue Kerby Anderson for saying it, they can sue the Washington Post because they published it. Mm-hmm. And Facebook, Twitter, and all these groups got this sort of carve out in the federal law that says, well, you can't be sued because they're a platform, not a publisher. That they're just a forum for people to discuss. They don't discuss things. So the problem with what Twitter is doing is that's not somebody else saying something. That's Twitter saying something. They're now entering the forum and saying, we got something to say about the president. Okay. Well, this immunity that they're getting, they shouldn't get, because that's only for people who aren't involved in controlling content. But once you start controlling your own content, you really shouldn't be immune from lawsuit like, every other. I mean, you can sue CBS, you can sue, but you can't sue Twitter. Well, that doesn't make any sense. And so that's what the executive order the president just signed sort of begins moving towards, is really reanalyzing and looking at and having the FCC give an opinion and all this on, are these groups really supposed to be protected under what this law says? Because I think there's some the courts haven't gone there yet, but I think there hasn't been this kind of momentum and this kind of obvious. I mean, if Twitter can do this to the president, then they can do it to anybody. And I think that begins to make people look at this and say, yeah, they really don't need a subsidy or a carve-out from the federal government.
Now, as I understand it, the executive order doesn't actually change anything.
Right.
It simply tells several agencies to begin looking at this to see what options are out there, what things might have changed, and to analyze this.
Yes, and it also says that they did a place where people could file their complaints with the federal government, and there's I think over 16,000 complaints of when. Again, these tech companies are changing their content or restricting or whatever, and so they're sort of just they've got great lawyers. They've got with the Justice Department. So this is a big deal for the tech companies who are kind of getting away with this. And the way I read it is Facebook. Zuckerberg is a little more savvy, and he realizes this is a danger and a real problem. So he's been trying to say, we don't want to comment on politics or on any of that. We're not going to do that. But unfortunately, sometimes your friends are the problem. And Twitter, he's really stepped in it, in my
Jack
opinion.
Dorsey.
Yeah, because
for sure.
He is not only commenting and sort of getting involved in political discussion, he's doing it with the President of the United States. So, he's clearly now a publisher. He's clearly not a platform where other people come and just do what they're doing. And I think he's really moving the needle to a lot higher percentage that they're going to lose this protection, which I'm all in favor of, by the way. I think they should be treated like everybody else. It should be one way or the other. It should be, we're not going to be involved in content, okay? If it's not criminal, we're not going to interpose ourselves. Or it should be, we're going to be involved in the content, and we know we can get sued now like everybody else. It has to be one of the two.
Is it different if Twitter were to say, here's some kind of language that is clearly offensive or something of that nature, so we're going to take it down? So they aren't commenting on it in a sense. They're simply saying it's advocating violence or something like that. So we're not going to allow this. There have been people who've been sort of pushed off Twitter for a little while for some of those things.
Right.
But now if they're stepping in and saying, now we're going to fact check, now they're actually playing a role. Is there a difference between those two?
I think there is. That the act itself specifically says it gives them protection for things like, things that would be violent or things that are, I forget what the words they use, but it's things like, morally they're really over the line. But notice that's not. It's not that this is like something that is close to a criminal act. It's not anything like that, and that's what it was really meant for. What it was trying to say is, if somebody's advertising, as part of a sex trafficking operation, obviously we would want, Facebook and Twitter and all that to say, no. But what if it's something close and they're not sure? They were trying to give them protection to take that down, to take that off. This is totally different from that, right? This is them now saying, well, I don't really think that what the president said is true, or I don't really think what, what Kerby Anderson or anybody, right? They're taking Candace Owens, and you got numerous examples, right? They took Senator Blackburn's political ads down, right? And not even getting into the other problem of the people that are doing this are these reviewers that are just massively, ideologically from one side of the perspective. So it's really, I think they're in real danger, and I think they should have been in real danger before they did what they did with the president. But I think they've really shown themselves to be over the line as far as becoming a publisher at this point.
Let's take a break, and already got some calls coming in. Maybe you want to talk about fact-checking. Maybe you want to talk about Twitter and Facebook and some of the social media, some of the people determining what will or will not show up on those pages. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many colleges in America face a bleak financial future. They may have survived campus riots and protests in the past, but they may not weather the financial challenges they will face starting this fall. The virus pandemic has already altered university education, and that trend is likely to continue for the near future. College campuses are empty as more and more students are learning over the internet. When colleges open up again, will all of the 20 million college students return to the campus? A sizable number of those students may decide to take a year off rather than pay nearly $50,000 a year to take a limited number of classes online. Some colleges have indicated they might not even open in the fall. Either or both of these scenarios could spell financial disaster for colleges. Charles Fain Lehman explains in a recent column that universities have four sources of income: tuition, public funding, on-campus fees, and endowments. Tuition income drops when students decide to take a break from college. Fewer students impact on-campus fees like housing and food service, and financially strapped states may not be able to provide as much public funding for colleges. A few select universities will benefit from the generous endowments they have put away. Those funds are not equally distributed. One expert estimates that half of the value of all college endowments are held by just 3% of the schools. Small liberal arts colleges might not have survived even without the current economic downturn. This will certainly accelerate their departure. But even the state schools will face an uncertain future. If these colleges experience a 20 to 30% drop in revenue, many of them will face a financial crisis. We will see a significant change in the college landscape over the next few years. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, calls already coming in, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Merle Matthews, Kelly Shackelford. Let me just mention that my little booklet that we have on social media, about half of that is on social media censorship and lots of examples that came from a Senate case. I'm really just going to have to do one just on social media censorship now. This has just gotten out of hand. And yet some of you want to also talk about the fact-checking, and maybe you smart guys can figure it out, because I think Steve, who's our first caller, wants to talk about that, because Donald Trump put out a tweet that said, "I can't stand back and watch this happening in the American city of Minneapolis." Total lack of leadership. And then talks about the fact that if you don't get your act together, I'll send in the National Guard. So Twitter, in its inscrutable wisdom, said this tweet violates the Twitter rules about glorifying violence. And I'm going, how? I don't even understand that.
It's bizarre.
And so some of these fact checks make no sense, and that's what our first caller wants to talk about. So let's head to Maine, WSEW. Steve, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for taking my call, Kerby. It's ironic. I was just thinking about this, and I could be, because I saw a friend of mine's post that was fact-checked, and I think I had something that I put up that was fact-checked, and they put on this very vague now terminology that says something to the effect that part of your post may or may not be totally factual. It's so vague that, and then I read it. I went into detail and read exactly what it was that they found offensive, and it ended up that what they found offensive was even more questionable than the original post itself.
Yeah. And I mean, they won an election. I mean, anybody that would disagree that there is any evidence that mail-in ballots are linked to voter fraud. First of all, as Dr. Matthews had to point out, we had a congressional election in North Carolina that was overturned because of that. Hans von Spakovsky has collected 1,200 plus different examples of voter fraud, and I think half of them have to do with absentee ballots or mail-in ballots. So to say that there's no evidence is a little bit much, isn't it?
Yeah, they're right that there's no evidence of any fraud except for the criminal convictions and a number of, if you want to count that as evidence, then I guess, I mean, it's just ridiculous. And, but it's just such a blatant sort of message that we are no longer a platform. We are now involved in content. We are now a publisher. Which means all those protections they had should go away. And we'll see what happens. I mean, I think it's really hard to get anything past Congress that would do this in a fine-tuned way because these people have so much money that they can buy, their way to make sure Congress doesn't ever, take away their wonderful provision that's giving them this protection. So I think what's being attempted now is probably the best shot to get something happen, and that is to look really closely at the words, to have the DOJ, to have the different federal agencies, lay this out. And I think that will give a lot of support to, decisions that will be made by courts in the future when they look at this and analyze really whether they really should get this immunity shield.
Yes.
One of the things that happens is there are fact check groups out there, factcheck.org.
Of course.
And I go to those to look at them at times, and some kind of question comes up, and they'll say, all right, this is the question, this is a statement, somebody raised a question about it, and they'll go through pros and cons, and they may at the end say, yes, we rate it true, no, one Pinocchio, three Pinocchios, four Pinocchios. They do that type of thing, but that's something that's separate than the issue itself. So I don't know that this is necessarily a good idea, but if Twitter had put, we're putting if somebody had responded and said, I don't like what the president said, they put an asterisk on that and came back and said, here's the pros and cons on it, and you can check our sources and so forth. I'm not sure that's a good idea, but at least it's something that goes back and says, here's what we're trying to do and understand, and here's some pros and cons of it. But that's just not what they're doing here.
Well, yeah, and I think what Buddy's talking about right now, too, is when these fact-check groups do what they do, they're transparent about what they're doing.
Right.
Whereas Twitter is not being transparent at all, like the caller who called in, how many people have we heard of who had something taken down or some message posted that there was something wrong with what they posted, and they don't even know, they have no idea what it's about. They're looking at their post and they're going, what's wrong with this post, right? Because there's zero transparency from these people who are doing this, who are taking down their site or taking down their post. I mean, again, you had Senator Marsha Blackburn's political ads taken down because it was, for abortion. It's like, well, what did she talk about? She talked about some hearings that she had. It's like, oh, well, I didn't know that wasn't allowed. You can't talk about your hearing. So there's no rhyme or reason to what they're doing. And a lot of times, and this is a real problem, there are more liberal people in these fact-checking positions. I mean, it's always been shown they're dramatically more liberal. And they will take things down. It'll be totally wrong. But by the time the appeal occurs, the timing for the post is no longer good. I mean, you can't get or do what you were trying to get accomplished. So that's one of the problems with even the Facebook review panel, that even if they overturn it, it's really too late by the time you get to that point.
Yes. And again, in the piece here, we talk about Marsha Blackburn, who actually they took it down because it was inflammatory. And
a political ad, inflammatory?
Yeah. And then they had one which was Susan B. Anthony. We know them. And it's a quote from Mother Teresa. And then the word censored was up there on the piece that Ted Cruz. So anyway, we'll give you some documentation for some of that if you'd like to read it. But let's get into another aspect of this. And we'll head up to Michigan this time. WLJN Hugh, thank you for calling today.
You're entirely welcome. I watched a video clip from PragerU and how actually it was back in 2017, brought a suit against Facebook on this public forum versus publisher. They want the benefits of both. That is Facebook. Well, they lost to a judge, a California judge, so no surprise, but I have no idea where they're going from here.
Yeah, the problem is if you're a private person and you're suing under these provisions, I mean, again, what are your arguments, right? I mean, you can't argue free speech because they're not the government. And so there's a lot of difficulty. So what they were trying to do in California is California has I forget what the technical terminology is, but basically where you can treat a private actor like they're the government because they've sort of opened a forum. It started with like a mall that was actually privately owned, but was kind of used as a place where people would come and talk. Mm-hmm. It's called the case was called Prune Yard. At the California Supreme Court, they said in our state we're going to treat this like free speech, and so that's what they were trying to do in California with their lawsuit. But I think, and everybody who's tried to get courts to interpret this provision of the Communications Decency Act to allow like a defamation suit or something like that against Facebook or Twitter or whatever has had problems, but they've never had the kind of support that the president's executive order will start to produce. When you start having complaints come in and the federal government's looking at that, when you start having the Federal Communications Commission doing analysis, when you start having the DOJ look at this provision and analyzing what it says versus what is going on, now you're creating a lot of evidence and a lot of really momentum that people will be able to use in the lawsuits to possibly break that shield of protection. So this is a first step, but I think it's a step that could lead to some real changes. We'll have to wait and see.
Let me put on the table a conversation we had last time Dennis Prager was in. And after the break, get your comments, because he said, okay, I recognize that Facebook and all sorts of other things, YouTube in particular, are private entities. And so we recognize that they're not governing the same kind of way and not covered the same way, say, the government is. But he said, just imagine, let's talk about the fact we only have a limited number of airlines. If somebody were not allowed to get on an airplane because they're holding a copy of the Wall Street Journal or something like that, we would obviously say that isn't the case. So there's a sense in which we recognize this only applies to the government, and since it's a private entity. But what about that? Because that's becoming kind of a big issue. And maybe when we come back to, we can explain maybe the difference between a platform and a publisher. Because a platform is kind of like just, if we have a free speech platform out here in the public park, I'm not going to sue the park because somebody said something I don't like. But if they say it in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or something like that, that's a little different. So I want to get your thoughts about that, because this is going to be one of the bigger issues, I think, in the 21st century. And since we have two real smart people here, I thought we would get some thoughts, especially about how IPI and maybe even First Liberty are going to think about these issues. So let's take a break. We'll come back, and we'll take some more phone calls, too. 1-800-351-1212. Be right back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we'd like to join our conversation. That's 1-800-351-1212. Let me encourage you to go to the website. First of all, I want to encourage you to go to ipi.org. And even this next Thursday, there's going to be an opportunity for the individuals, if they want to register, to hear from Amity Slays. Are we headed towards another Great Depression? I think she would know since she wrote the book Forgotten Man about the Great Depression. You also, a while back, had Gordon Chang on, who's been sitting in that chair in the past with us, but that was good on China. So there's just a number of great resources there, but people can sign up and register for that on June 4th, which is that Thursday. And also, while we're there, might as well mention the fact that you've got a couple of really good articles on the first manned space flight, hopefully it'll happen tomorrow, by a private company. And so some pretty exciting things happening right now. And if you go to ipi.org, you can find all about that.
Major change, and SpaceX and some of the other organizations, the private sector groups that are trying to move into space. And so this is the first time that a private sector company's rocket is slated to take men into space. And, interesting, when I watch them, the astronauts go and get in the capsule and so forth, and you look inside there, this does not look like the Mercury capsule.
No, it does
not look like the Apollo. This is a good-looking capsule on the inside.
Yeah, and the way they're dressed looks like something out of a science fiction novel instead of something that's just kind of clunky and all that. So there is a difference between SpaceX and NASA in some respects, but there will be if it launches tomorrow. And, of course, we did all the big build-up to it Wednesday, and then nothing happened, but hopefully it'll happen tomorrow. It will take them to the space station, and the first time they haven't had to hitch a ride with the Soyuz rockets, right? So
that's since 2011. Yeah, the Russians have been ferrying us up, and we had to pay them, I think the last ones were around $80 million or so to hitch a ride up there, and the Russians had been dramatically increasing the price. But you hate to be dependent upon the Russians to be able to get you up to the space station.
Well, and again, they're talking about low orbit kinds of facilities. They're talking about landing in Moon, first of all, and mining Moon, and eventually going to Mars. So there's just all sorts of things that are kind of high-tech that many of us that are older around the table remember that, watching that when you were in the schools, but that hasn't been something for a long time. So all of that at ipi.org. Kelly Shackelford, if you go to firstliberty.org, just the other day you had Senator Ted Cruz on. People are already quoting that, but again, it was unmasking the constitutional crisis with Senator Ted Cruz. You had one a while back on the military. You got one coming up on the military.
We do. We have the 76th year commemorating D-Day, and so this Thursday we're going to have on a number of very highly decorated military leaders to talk about D-Day and talk about really leadership and character and just the kind of things and how important our military is. So it'll be a great one to tune in for, and we've been doing one of those every week. And the one with Ted Cruz, if they want to watch, we talked about, I thought, who better to talk about sort of what's all going on, because everybody's watching this going, what about the Constitution, with all these things that are happening in all these states. And so Senator Cruz has argued 10 cases at the Supreme Court and has always been a person who's focused on this. So we thought he'd be a good person to talk not only about that in general, but in particular also about churches and religious freedoms. And we also got into judges and the judicial appointments as well.
Yes. So a couple of good issues and certainly some great websites. So we encourage you to go there and support both of these organizations because they just do such a great job. But just before we get into some other topics, what about this idea of a platform versus publishing? Some people might say you're making a distinction that isn't relevant, but I think it is relevant, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really relevant. I mean, when you start deciding what is going to be said, you are now a speaker. And you should be responsible for what you say. I mean, in whatever means that is. So what they're trying to do is say that they shouldn't be treated as a speaker because they're just providing a platform for other people to speak. And, that was true in the beginning. But the problem is now these tech companies, the more and more control, the more and more power they get, the more they want to decide what is said and what is not said. And So they should be treated like publishers because that's what they're doing. I mean, when you comment on what the president's saying, you are not just a platform at that point. You are now speaking. And so I really think they've moved themselves out of that protection. The other problem is, the reason, we say free speech is protected, only against the government because, the Constitution only protects you against the government. The other problem, though, is these tech companies have totally monopolized and have taken over the arena. So if you want to speak these days, you have to be on one of these tech companies' platforms to speak. And, so the difficulty is, when you have a monopoly like that, there will be no free speech if they're allowed to take away all speech. So that's why you have all these antitrust investigations and actions that are beginning as well, because I don't know if people remember, but gosh, I don't know how long ago we had that expert on about how all these things worked, and he said something that I thought was so accurate. He said, years ago, people who are a little older will remember all their news came through the evening news, CBS, NBC, ABC. And everybody watched, and that was the funnel for all the news to come through. Then we had the internet and all this stuff, and it exploded, and everybody could get their news from all these places. What's happened now is all the communication and all the news is now coming through 3 or 4 major, tech companies, and we're back to the evening news controlling what our news will be. And that is the danger of where we are right now, with these tech companies not being responsible to the Constitution because they're not the government, and yet being able to now begin to decide what and then you had the Epstein testimony saying how they can easily through these platforms they can turn 20 million, 30 million, 40 million votes easily. And you begin to realize how dangerous this is to our system of government.
Where does innovation play a role here? Because people have told me young people don't use Facebook anymore. That's mostly for seniors. And then I talked about Twitter, and somebody said, well, most of the young people have moved off to Twitter. They've gone to Instagram. And then you've got TikTok and other things out there. Does innovation play a role in simply saying if people are feeling like they're being frustrated, I'll move to a new platform, and that sort of addresses the problem?
Yeah, and that's some of the argument why people don't like antitrust. There's a lot of people that don't like antitrust. Conservatives kind of split when you get into antitrust, and they say, well, there should be competition. The problem with and the reason they're looking into some of these things is Google and these people are bullies. And they've really made it to where almost nobody can enter the field. When people try, they get bought up or just pushed out because if you don't have, if you don't have hundreds of billions of dollars, then you can't get your way up. People disagree about that. Some people think somebody could make it. Other people say no, they've made it now to where you can't. There's no way that you can survive in what they can throw at you. So I don't know about that. I don't know about antitrust, but I lean towards more of the issue of the Section 230 shield, because that is Congress giving them a protection that every other publisher doesn't have. And so I think I think that was, for the president to move that direction with the executive order, I think was smart, because I do think that's something that's easily controllable. The problem is you can't get any of this through Congress to change that rule because, they can shower billions of dollars on all the congressmen and senators, and it's very hard to get something through, when you've got that going on. So I think let's look at what this originally said, what it meant, and let's see that that's not what's happening right now. I think that's maybe the best approach they have.
One of the things that we talk about in this particular booklet is where Ted Cruz, who you just had on the other day, said that he felt that the big tech companies are larger and more powerful than Standard Oil was when it was broken up, and larger and more powerful than AT&T when it was broken up. Those of us around the table at least remember the second one. You'd have to be a little older to remember the first one, but nevertheless, that gets us back to this kind of a monopoly idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of things already been uncovered by the state attorneys general that a lot of things they're saying. I mean, how do the ad prices get determined? I mean, these tech companies are controlling all sides of the business, so that like they're all artificial because there's no real competition, and they don't let you see what happens with your ads, and they don't let you see what they're doing with their algorithms, and they don't, so they control everything, and there's no competition to cause anybody to understand what's going on or to have any rationale for why they're charging you this for that ad or not, one for the other. So there's all kinds of things that make it to where this is not like a free market system that's going on here, and that's why they're looking into these things.
We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Finally, states are allowing and encouraging businesses to reopen. But when they attempt to rehire laid-off workers, many employers are getting a surprising response. No thank you. We actually should not be shocked by this, because the U.S. government has made unemployment pay better than work. The government created this disincentive to work last March by passing the CARES Act. The bill contained a provision many conservatives complained about, but allowed to go through in the rush to provide relief to companies and workers affected by coronavirus lockdowns. The CARES Act increased normal unemployment benefits by $600 per week, which equates to a $15 per hour minimum wage. According to a new economic working paper, more than 2/3 of laid-off workers are making more unemployed than they were at their jobs. 1 in 5 will make twice as much not working. Lower-wage workers benefit the most. The bottom 10%, mostly part-timers, will collect 3 times more if they remain unemployed. Libertarian commentator John Stossel aired a TV report on this. He featured the CEO of an Arkansas sawmill, who told him he simply cannot match the state's unemployment benefits. He said, "We haven't seen an application in weeks. If businesses cannot find qualified workers, the recovery will be slower." A guy who quit his job transporting hospital patients told Stossel, "My little girl is loving it." What about the patients? John Stossel says the $600 unemployment enhancement to the CARES Act made it so a law that was supposed to help people did the opposite of what politicians intended. Well, some politicians. The $600 per week boost to unemployment is supposed to expire July 31st, but there's an effort in Congress to extend it through January. John Stossel says workers who depend on handouts for too long descend into what social scientists call learned helplessness. The left is fine with using coronavirus relief to increase state power over our lives. We shouldn't be. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merle Matthews with us. This comes from Associated Press. More than 1,200 California pastors say they will resume in-person services. Of course, it'll be this Sunday, Pentecost, in defiance of Governor Gavin Newsom's stay-at-home order to slow the spread of the coronavirus. Newsom has gradually allowed some businesses to reopen at the state's number of virus-related hospitalizations denominations has flattened, but churches are still banned. And if you start calculating this, one attorney says that it could be as many as 3,000 churches across California having in-person services. So, Kelly, it does seem to me that California is ground zero of some of this battle on religious liberty this weekend.
I think it is. I think we've had battles all over the country. And again, at First Liberty, we've won all those. In fact, if people want to see, they might not know. If they go to firstliberty.org, there's a deal that says COVID-19 in one of the tabs. And if they click on it, it'll list a number of the victories. So you can see, you can read case decisions, et cetera. But a lot of victories there. But Illinois, I'd say the last two that we were really looking at, a week ago, it was Minnesota. But when the president said what he did last week, Minnesota immediately almost came out with the governor saying, okay, I'm going to start allowing churches up. So Minnesota kind of went away. Illinois looked like it was going to be the next big battle because the governor's being really intransigent there. I mean, he was like, we'll let the churches open when there's a vaccine, which basically could be never, and just said a lot of crazy things. And then, of course, you had the churches in Chicago being persecuted, told they might bulldoze the church, the African-American church that had a police raid on it for having a service, and all these things you just couldn't believe it. But then late yesterday, the Illinois governor just totally collapsed and said, I'm backing off because this thing's going to the Supreme Court, and evidently he was staring down the eyes of Justice Kavanaugh and didn't like what he saw. So now we're to California. It really is the only one left. And what's happened there is, again, the governor said, I'm not going to allow churches back until the winter, is what he originally said. And the churches, they put up with this for a while, but they're now watching all the businesses that are doing things safely, and they realize we could be much safer than the businesses. Why are we being discriminated against? And so, they finally said, this is weeks ago, they said, Pentecost Sunday, we will be back. And again, after the president's statement, which was very strong last week, within a day or so, Governor Newsom all of a sudden flinched, and he said, okay, I've got a new order for the churches, and it's not 3 months from now, they can start meeting immediately. But we have some guidelines. And one of the guidelines was 25% capacity or 100, whichever is the smallest. Well, that's really silly. That's not what you do with the secular groups. It's discriminatory. And so I'm sure a number of these churches who are going to be opening this weekend and doing it safely with social distancing, with disinfectant and doing things really that, to be honest, the secular organizations can't often even do. But they're going to open. And so I think the question is, two questions I have. Number one, will local law enforcement take action against pastors and churches? That's one of the things we're going to, because we had a number of clients in Illinois that were going to open, but the sheriff called and said, by the way, I'm not doing anything. So we really couldn't set up a case because the sheriff was like, I'm not going to have any part of taking any criminal action against a pastor or a church because I think what the governor's doing is wrong and it's unconstitutional. So that's question number one. I think if you have 3,000 churches all across California, you're going to probably have some people that lack in discretion and wisdom, and they're going to go arrest or charge a pastor or charge a church. If that happens, we're going to see that whole thing in California really began to explode. The other sort of variable that we're waiting to see what happens is, I think if that does happen, I think Governor Newsom, just like Governor Pritzker in Illinois, is going to not like the political optics of that. I mean, putting a pastor in handcuffs or, going after a pastor with police officers because they had church on Pentecost Sunday, that's not a good political move. And so the question would be, is Governor Newsom going to say, we're like the governor of Illinois says, these are no longer, restrictions. These are now guidelines. And therefore we're not going to enforce them with, the force of law. Those are the two things. But California is the one battle left that we're watching with regard to churches and going back to their services.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Merle Matthews, we mentioned before that the church you go to is a mega church by any person's definition, and you met last week, and you went to the service.
And the week before.
And you seem pretty healthy, and you haven't gotten sick, and I don't know of anybody in your church that has gotten sick.
They made a point of saying that they were implementing several guidelines, so every other row is blocked off, 3 seats between each family, so they have to be sort of socially distanced there, and they wipe down the whole sanctuary after each service. So they're doing a number of things to try to say we're going above and beyond the call of duty. I mean, they're doing the wipe down after the last service, and nobody's going to be in there for another week. The coronavirus will not live that long, but they're still going around and doing it.
Yeah, well, one of the other things that's kind of interesting is we're getting a kind of a mixed message on these masks, aren't we? Because this one, again, I'm taking this from Fox News, and this actually was reported before, but it comes from the health specialist at the World Health Organization, so you know it must be true. I'm having fun with that. But here, Dr. April Baller, if you do not have any respiratory symptoms such as a fever, cough, or runny nose, you do not need to wear a mask. Mask should only be used by health care workers, caretakers, or people who are sick with symptoms of fever and cough. Then the CDC says, in light of the evidence, the CDC recommends wearing cloth face coverings in public settings where other social distancing measures are difficult to maintain. I'm seeing people wearing them outside, which I don't think is a good idea. And, of course, there's some great arguments right now about that it might actually increase the amount of CO2 that you get. So who do you trust anymore here? And for them to say, well, they're safe in a liquor store, but they're not safe in a church. Pretty crazy.
That doesn't work. And that's the problem with the orders with regard to the churches, is they treat the churches differently than they do non-religious uses. And there's still some states that have these things. Washington State has one that doesn't allow religious gatherings. And we've had to file a federal lawsuit out there, and they immediately backed down, but they didn't change the order. So there's a lot of these things where they like to have their orders to scare people to think they might do something, but they're kind of backing off. You can't do an order that says if you're a secular group, you can meet, you can do everything. We trust you to social distance, but if you're a religious group,
the congregants,
you can only have 10 people in your facility. My favorite was what we were about to have to file this week in Minnesota before the governor backed down, which was they were opening the Mall of America, and in a restaurant you could have up to 50 people as long as you were outside. But if you were a church, you were limited to 10 people inside or outside. Now that's the kind of thing that you just look at and you go, oh, I want to hear the argument in court for this. This is going to be fascinating.
I don't think there is one. Well, on Monday, we'll try to cover what happens in California. Of course, we also got Lee Strobel and Jeff Myers on. And by the way, Jeff Leach. And Tuesday, we got George Barna. We got a great lineup. But let me, just before we run out of time, encourage you to go to firstliberty.org and isi.org to find out some of the things that we've been talking about. And thank you both for giving us 3 hours here today as we've talked about a lot of really important issues. And next week, we'll be covering a lot of topics. And then I guess we'll have Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. And pray for Dr. Merle Matthews. You're going to get your knee replaced, right?
We're hoping.
Yeah, so again, so we'll give him a week or two off and then get him back here as well. I want to thank Andrew and Steve and Ivy for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.